Hi, this is your buddy Lee. I'm going to be reading from my vlog. His blog is titled Ego, Projection of Ego, Spirituality in the Creative Process. I'm not by nature an egotistical person. Egocentric maybe, but definitely not egotistical. I would like to think that I have a good grasp of myself and that ego wouldn't inflate my own perception of self. Not that I don't sometimes play my little mental games where I try to manifest a sort of state in which the dream is transfused and sort of overlapped upon the precipice of the actual, and within the actual is the key root of the matter, I think. It's hard to navigate the flows of isness without a sort of root currents to set your dream manifest upon. The in-between of the hardwired facts of the real and the dream is of course a sort of ethereal gray area in which the mental and physical sense and said understanding of which gets a little blurred. One might call that the veil, but how does one as myself equate ego? Well, my first thought of ego is that it is to be greatly feared, something as much that needs tamed and pushed back into a small corner, not to impose and impede one's vision and distort one's perception, therefore blurring the clarity and crispness of mental sight. And that being said, there seems to be almost a primal instinct that has a deep root within the id of ego. It in itself, of course, is not the sum of the whole of the self, but still it sits within the spectrum of self, and said self's projection of self-image almost in the freak of a feedback loop altering the so-called feed. I'm not saying that the ego isn't healthy as much as its vigor and potency can definitely help aid one in their pursuits in life, but the following of a surety is almost assured in the orchestrations of manifestation of one's applied will come through with a greater rate of completion and a quicker response of rebounding from the sting of failure. It may just boil down to that old axiom, I am, therefore I must do. The force of will set the game of action with the perceived all. The term all, of course, is used as a sort of metaphor to simplify the symbiosis of patterns within existence. From the mundane, everyday hustle and bustle, the daily grind struggle of life in which we make our way of survival. Not being that this game of survival we play has overcome the natural cycles of subsistence, a bit a purer form of life and more true than any notion that civilization can concoct. That said, ego, capital E, capital G, capital O, has in a way been a pillar upon which man has hung its most needy material self existence upon, if only as a lesser and more base root. One that merits maintenance and due diligence to maintain physical balance and health, that definitely can play a factor as far as the relatively newer horizon the humans have taken. And within the maintenance of self within the incarnate flesh helps keep the anchor strong in the all. You will still see through material currency of ego that runs in circles of possessions and the incorporation of material possessions into the daily ritual. We present our own costumes to form a statement to which culture and ideas we subscribe to, from dictations of fashion to projections of lifestyle, are simply a matter of pure personal aesthetic, and not even aesthetic sometimes, or methodology, to others a compulsion, and even others material wants evolve into an addiction. And I myself live simply due to the necessity and of course fate. Because of either the consequences of my own choices or the compounding of gathered issues, I was forced to make a hard choice. Was I to continue to strive, or should I take the simple path and dedicate myself to that? The fact that I had come to such a hard fact to swallow was like a heavy weight that sat heavy on me. I knew at the moment that I was at a crossroads. It was not that I was unhealthy, and yes, I had suffered from poor health at times, that had forced me on and off to take so-called sabbaticals from the normalcy I knew of. I, of course, inherited a childhood of middle-class comforts, not that I ever really found those trappings a necessity. I suppose I might have seen those things or things in general as optional. Early on in life, I always had music. And so much I opted out of college, though I did go to school for a time of journalism for a time, but never completed it. And I decided by the time I hit my teens that I knew I was going to be a creative type. I would spend hours as a child writing stories on my father's typewriter and playing my guitar. I was not delusional as to think I would be able to make my creative pursuits into a living. It was not that I didn't feel that my own artistic output was worthy of reception from people or that I didn't have some root of talent. It's not like I did not have some root of talent to pull from. I just found simple pleasures in the creations of something. That satisfaction was all I really needed, I suppose. Perhaps there is also some sort of fundamental sense of self-satisfaction when one sets watermarks for their art form and then reach them. The process of growth and the skills involved in the process of creation. Similar in some ways to the drive of survival, but more akin to help fill the need for balance, structure, and order. A familiar process in which one can translate a sort of spiritual ethos and mold and shape it into a forged unit of material expression. That's if one ever takes the creative pursuit that's seriously in non-philosophical application, the same rituals of creative expression can be just read as indulgence, purely experiential joy, and or simple satisfaction of completion. Nonetheless, we see how the balance of art life plays out. A lot of people have tacit interest in the arts in their youth and especially in their developmental stage. It may develop into a passion and a preoccupation, but for most people it doesn't evolve much farther and even degrades in the importance as an outlet for them. Of course, simply within the art/life debate, we see that the consumption of creative content can vary. Often love for things like music fostered the most early of years, especially if that person's parent is a big music fan and plays that music to their child. The familiarity of creative content can bring comfort, as does many familiar memories that help form our own ideas of comfort. Being as it may, my upbringing was a common middle-class childhood and joyfully liberal adolescence. I didn't rebel as much from my parents as much as I did not really comprehend conformity. I didn't comprehend conformity. I knew in my youth I was allowed a bit more leeway in this way, and I presented myself when I was more likely to be excused for eccentricity in my youth. And I had a theory early on that maybe I was not hardwired with the instinctual memory that granted me more of a pressing urge to test one's current status in social circles, and are generally the subtle niceties that occur between strangers. I was messing myself, I suppose, or maybe sabotaging myself, playing games in my youth of naive models of conformity. What ego I had then. With older eyes, I see my younger self's outlets of ego as mere following a whim. Sometimes a notion of the big question of who I wanted to be. But of course, youth is just often time spent playing adopted roles as we play with our other youth, still trying to figure out just what the hell we were going to do to live in this world that we were thrown into. And still gotta learn the rules of the game it's playing so that eventually one can make their own game, so to speak, if they so choose. Don't think that I don't find the irony in that rant at all. I do find that irony. Hopefully more concrete strings of words may be coming out of me, which is nothing really to comfort me in the actuality of my existence, of course. But if you find hope in actions that provide fruit in ways that aren't necessarily exactly either as highly noticed or regarded, it's not exactly the end of making means, but one can still their own little minds focus an image and go forward. The ambition of one's creative flow maybe just to create their own little loop of relation. Create their own loop of relation. And if one ever gets up the gall to assert themselves with the art, there is that whole chance of deflation. Poor response can deflate the ego thing. As most creative types are quite introverted and use art as a platform of expression and projection. I am no one to gauge the worth of such things. I know what I think is good, and I think is the thing that it gets to me, which is something that I think is very important. It's something not that's easily quantifiable, but takes the real magic of exploring it. Magic with a K, of course. On the creative end, I can't justify my pursuit, but I meet my own standards. In my own youth, I was content to play simple bar chords, riffs, and sing Beatles harmonies. In old age, now I find a bit more fun trying to play a bit more technically. When one comes to a sort of crossroads as I have, you have to make a sort of choice. The creative process to me is, yes, it's a hobby, and I have no real intentions as to the end results that people ever consume said stuff that I make. But maybe a few nice words would be cool, but it's the fun of the moment that drives me as one who lives a simple life and has sometimes delusions of a spiritual person and try to walk as one. Yes, born in and came upon a certain fate of sorts. Oh well, fate. It's just a little pin that holds the fabric. But I had taken that hand of fate and then settled into a new groove, a new flow. And maybe the overcomplication of my own personal strategy in life is the byproduct of maybe originally a need to compensate, of course, for a failure to satisfy my own ego. But it's come to the point that I find I grow older and the satisfaction of the process isn't good enough for me. Much to say, I have a pretty strong sense of self. I just try not to fall victim to ego, and especially getting it too involved with my pursuits. I'm quite content to live simply, and hopefully I'll get to spend much more of my time within this new balance I have found.